this lesson, we're going to look at how, with certain types of image, we can use low global illumination values even for the final render. We'll also look at how to recreate photorealistic glare and bloom effects, and finish off by using some of the fundamental 5 SRW steps for post-production. Before moving on to the final render settings, I'm going to show you how to use the vray lens effect tool to recreate photorealistic bloom and glare, the flare and the star effect produced when a light source comes in contact with a DSLR camera lens. Like in all simulations, the most important thing when using vray is to have a realistic approach. For this reason, I've placed many small vray light spheres here, each with an intensity of 10 watts. The same simulation could be carried out using a vray light material, but I personally prefer a vray light as it's the most realistic emitter simulator. Before launching the render, we go to Environment menu, which we can access directly using the A key, and add the vray lens effect. If you forget this step and you add it once the render is finished, the render will have to be calculated again in order to obtain the bloom and the glare effect. Let's launch a small region render without activating any options in vray lens effect. Okay, so for now, no particular effects are visible, but if we activate bloom and then click update, we can see the result. You'll notice that the effect has been updated without recalculating the render, and this is the bloom, that is a luminous halo surrounding the strongly lit areas, which is in this case are actually the light bulbs. Now we can activate the glare by selecting glare type from camera, to get a glare that's calculated directly using the vray physical camera settings. This is the effect that a combination of these lights and this camera would produce in real life. This kind of luminous star effect is called glare. Glare in particular can only be obtained by framing light sources, while bloom can also emanate from surfaces that are just real light, like these white sofas, for example. To get a realistic look, the ideal is to activate both the glare and the bloom, and also enable the diffraction option. This simulates a slight breakdown of the white light into various or more emphasized colors. For each of the two effects, we can also adjust the intensity and size. As I said, in real life, the way the glare looks is related to the f-aperture of the DSLR camera. So to get different effects, we should theoretically render again using different f-values in the vray physical camera. Luckily, however, vray let us do it easily from this panel. So let's change the f-value in this box. To increase the effect, we need higher f-values, just like with a real DSLR camera. For the final rendering, we can save some processing time on distribution of light. Light images, known as high-key images, are characterized by light surfaces. The precise and the defined calculation of DGI is therefore fundamental to avoid splotches and artifacts which are more evident under these circumstances. Conversely, dark images, known as low-key images, are mainly based on reflections and direct light. So in this case we can minimize the calculation of the irradiance map, as its definition won't be discernible in any case, given the large amount of darkness in the image. Naturally, we can also lower the light cache, but I want to do it now because I want to show you a new option. Seeing as we have many reflections and a lot of glossiness to calculate, let's activate Use Light Cache for Glossy Rays. This option allows you to save a little bit of time on the glossiness calculation, 10–12%, without significantly changing your final result. As the name of the parameter suggests, however, information generated by the light cache will be used to achieve this, so let's set it 1500. Finally, we'll set the noise threshold to 0.005 as always. Now we can move on to selecting the render elements we are going to use in post-production. What we said about using the irradiance map on low-key images is naturally also valid for ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion usually make little sense for images with a lot of dark tones, but we will add it anyway because here we need to emphasize the full details on the two sofas. Let's activate it as we saw in the lesson 24. Just select vray extra text and set vray dirt here. We drag it onto one of the slots in the material editor and use the radius parameter to control the breadth of the ambient occlusion. 5/4 centimeters is a suitable value considering that we just needed to highlight the folds in the sofa. Now select vray reflections, which we'll be using to emphasize the reflections. Lastly, it's always a good idea to add a vray wire color as well, as it's really useful for quickly creating masks in Photoshop to adjust your image. And here we are in Photoshop. I've already put all the layers into one file and renamed them according to the render element that generated them: final render, reflections, ambient occlusion, and wire color. Every time we carry out 5SRW post-production, we always use the unsharp mask twice, the first time to improve the general contrast and the second time in the final step to improve the sharpness. In this scene, the colors are well balanced and there are no dominant colors, so we don't need to set the white balance as we did in the lesson number 30, the living. So we can start straight away on the general contrast. An S-curve can usually be used to improve the contrast, but this doesn't always create good results. In this case, for example, we have very dark and very light areas in the same image. Just applying a single curve to the whole image would make the dark areas too dark and overexpose the light ones. The ideal would be to have a curve that can adapt to the different parts of the image, and that's exactly what a unsharp mask with a wide radius does. So let's convert this layer into a smart object. Select Unsharp Mask from the filter menu and set a high radius value, 80 pixels, with a low amount, 30%. Wide radius, low amount. Later we'll see how in the last step, the sharpness step, will be doing the exact opposite. So here we are, we've improved the general contrast, but certain areas, the lightest ones, are slightly overexposed and we've lost some details. We can get it back by taking advantage of the mask assigned to the effect, but how can we mask off the overexposed area really precisely? I'll show you a little trick. We create a black layer, then change the blend mode to hard mix. These colored points are the overexposed areas caused by the unsharp mask. In fact, if I delete the effect, they almost completely disappear. Now that we know exactly which areas to mask off, we select the effect mask and use a little black brush to paint over just those areas. As you can see, the overexposed area slowly disappears, while we can just leave the really small overexposed area as they are. Now I can delete this layer because we no longer need it, and holding down Shift I click on the mask to see the effect before and after masking. Before, after. Let's suppose that we now want to emphasize the reflections on the floor. I go to watercolor layer and select the floor using the magic wand tool. I then go to reflections layer and click on the mask. This automatically creates a mask for the floor. To finish off, I set the blend mode to screen, as we always do when we add both a reflection and a refraction in the post-production stage. Now let's increase the light in the background. As we underlined in the previous lesson, the background light comes from reflections, so again we will use the reflection layer, but with a different mask. Just like before, we create a mask from the watercolor layer and we link this mask to a new reflections layer, again using screen. If the reflections don't increase enough, we can just duplicate layer 3-4 times using Ctrl J until we are satisfied with the result. Conversely, to reduce the reflections on a surface, we use the soft light blend mode. We create a mask of this panel and we link it to a curve. Even without touching the curve, the soft light blend mode reduces the effect of the reflections and we can use the opacity to adjust the amount. Now it's time to emphasize the sofa details using ambient occlusion. I create a mask, assign it to the ambient occlusion layer and change the blend mode to multiply. Now we can see all the details. As always, the key to achieving a realistic effect is not to overdo it. 50% opacity works well. As I mentioned earlier, we started with a wide but low intensity unsharp mask, and now we will finish off with another unsharp mask, but this time it will have a radius of just 1 pixel and a very high amount. By pressing Ctrl-Alt-Shift-E, we create a new layer which is the sum of the visible layers beneath it. So now we set the unsharp mask radius to 1 pixel and amount to 19% to bring out the small details as much as possible. Then I alt-click on mask to hide the layer. We'll finish off this lesson by using a white brush to paint this mask, to emphasize the details of the most important objects in the image. This way, by also taking advantage of definition, we will have helped to distinguish the secondary areas from the more interesting ones, to further improve the perception of the whole image.